Mother. And I don't know how many of you have heard of Hannah. She is a very small portion of the Bible. But I will suggest to you that if God so desires to put someone in the Bible, it is there for a reason. It is there for us to learn and to understand a little more. And while Hannah's story could easily be overlooked, I think if we do so, we miss a very important woman who is, in fact, a shining example of what it is to be a mother. Our first scripture today, and I'm going to be reading this out of the Message. I normally do this out of the English Standard Version. The Message has a little bit more of the way you and I talk kind of flavor to it. So this may sound a little bit different, and it definitely will be different than your pulpit Bibles, but bear with me. It says, there was once a man who named in Ramathan, his descended from the old Zuph family in the Ephraim hills. His name was Elkanah, and he connected with Zuphus from Ephraim, and his father Jeroham, his grandfather Elihu, and his great-grandfather Tohu. And he had two wives. The first was Hannah, and the second was Peninnah. Peninnah had children, and Hannah did not. Every year this man went from his hometown up to Shiloh to worship and offer sacrifices to the God of the angel armies. Eli and his sons, Hophni and Phinehas, served the priest of God there. When Elkanah sacrificed, he passed along helpings from the sacrificial meal around to his wife Peninnah and all her children, as he gave them a special generous helping to Hannah, because he loved her so much, and because God had not given her children. But her rival wife taunted her cruelly, rubbing it in and never letting her forget that God had not given her children. This went on year after year, and every time she went to the sanctuary of God, she could expect the taunting. And Hannah was reduced to tears and had no appetite. And her husband Elkanah said, "Oh, Hannah, why are you crying? Why aren't you eating? And why are you so upset? Am I not worth more to you than 10 sons?" At the first glance, Hannah's story seems to be a very small story in a very large book. She's a woman who desperately wanted to be a mother, but for reasons we cannot understand, she was denied that. And I would suggest that perhaps her life is to inspire others. Certainly she is one of the matriarchs of the Jewish people. They regard Hannah quite highly. And that is because Hannah was at a time in the Jewish history where things were not going very well. Judges 21 through 25 says, "In those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes." There were many individuals who tried to keep the people straight. Eli was one of them. Unfortunately, his sons were not. His sons were as despicable as they come. And to be honest with you, what is happening in Israel at this moment is everybody is just picking their own ways to go. I will decide what my truth is, you decide what yours is, and neither have anything to do with each other. Very much the way the world is today. You can't tell me what is right and wrong, nor can God. That's for me to decide. And unfortunately, the way that goes, if I take and put the ultimate authority for my right and wrong in my own hands, I become God, and I take God out of his rightful place. And this is what the people of Israel are doing. Now, I will tell you that Hannah has it rough. While she's, and this is, there's a lot of folks that will talk about the polygamy of the Old Testament. And I had someone comment that, the Bible condones polygamy. And I will tell you that it never condones polygamy. And in fact, it's instances like this that the Bible points out, it's a bad thing. It never leads to good situations. And in this particular situation, Hannah is suffering because of her sister wife. She desires to be a mother in the worst of ways. But she's not the only one with a problem. You see, God has a problem as well. The only godly person that is leading Israel at this time is a man named Eli. And he has 2 sons, and they're about as worthless as you can get. In fact, to be honest with you, they're reprehensible. They have done terrible things, and God is not happy. So here is Hannah praying for a son, and here's God needing to raise someone up to lead Israel, knowing that it will not be Eli's sons. I think so often when I'm in a world of problems like Hannah is, it's easy for me to get tied up with the whys, the wanting to answer. Why don't you do this, God? Why won't you do that? And I so often desire to see the answers. And I fail to understand that I may not, as a human being, be able to understand those answers. They may be just a little bit higher than I'm able to understand. The fact that God allows for suffering in our lives, the fact that God allows us to have situations that give us angst and troubles, and when we pray for relief, we don't get the answers we want, can sometimes be sad and sometimes be a little bit on the side of, is God listening? And I suspect that this is where Hannah is at this moment. Make no mistake, God has answers. You won't necessarily see them. You may not even see them in your entire life. I know that in many times in my life, I have questioned God and said, God, this doesn't make sense to me. Why are you allowing this? Why are you not doing this? Why are you not answering those prayers? And I will tell you, there are times where eventually I did get the answer. There are times where I have heard, my grace is sufficient. You just have to learn to trust me. Can I trust a God that I don't know? If I call you up and say, hey, I'd really like to borrow $20 from you, and you go, I don't know if I know you that well. To be honest with you, I don't know how you manage your money. I'm not sure I'm comfortable giving you a $20 bill because I don't want to not have to get that money back and then know you're in debt. The same is true with God. I can't trust God with the problems and the answers unless I first do trust Him. And to trust Him, I have to know Him. And to know Him, I have to come to Him. And what we see here is Hannah does just that. Our third verse for the day is 1 Samuel 1, 9 through 19. It says, so Hannah ate, and she pulled herself together and slipped away quietly and entered the sanctuary. The priest Eli was on duty at the entrance of God's temple in the customary seat. Crushed in soul, Hannah prayed to God and cried inconsolably. Then she made a vow. O God of the angel armies, if you will take a good hard look at my pain, if you will quit neglecting me and go into action for me by giving me a son, I'll give him completely, unreservedly to you. I'll set him apart for a life of holy discipline. And it so happened that as she continued in prayer before God, Eli was watching her closely. Hannah was praying in her heart silently. Her lips moved, but no sound was heard. And Eli jumped to the conclusion that she was drunk. And he approached her and said, "You're drunk. How long do you plan to keep this up? Sober up, woman." And Hannah responded, "Oh no, sir, please. I am a woman hard used. I haven't been drinking, not a drop of wine or beer. The only thing I have been pouring out my heart, pouring it out to God. Don't for a minute think I am a bad woman. It is because I'm so desperately unhappy and in such pain that I have stayed here so long." And Eli answered her, "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel give you what you have asked him." "Think well of me and pray for me," she said, and went her way. And she ate heartily, and her face was radiant. Up before dawn they worshipped God and returned home to Ramah. And Elkanah slept with Hannah his wife, and God made making the necessary arrangements in response to what she had asked. Now Hannah made a very bold promise to God. She was going to dedicate that son unreservedly, without any conditions, to God. You know, I've heard a lot of folks talk about people in war in a foxhole, and things don't look so good. And they said, "Lord, if you get me out of this, do whatever you ask. I'll become a priest, I'll become a preacher, I'll do this, I'll do that." And they are very sincere while in the foxhole. But when the war is over, do they remember the promise? To be real honest with you, Hannah is making a promise to God that would have to be very hard to keep. She's asking for a son that she will then immediately surrender up to God. She will surrender the right to raise him. She will surrender the right to show him the right way. And the truth of it is, under Jewish law, Hannah could have, after the birth of her son, said, "You know, God, maybe you misunderstood what I promised." And there is a provision for her to buy back her son, if you would. She could take that 5 shekels, which would be about $1.35 for you and me. Even inflation, that isn't all that much money. And she could have negotiated with God and said, "No, God, you know, I did give him to you, but now here's the $1.35. I want him back." But she did not. She let him become weaned, and then she took him to the temple for Eli to raise and to train. And she would visit him every year, perhaps even more often. She would sew clothes for him. She would pray for him. She was constantly overlooking Samuel because, to be honest with you, she still loved him dearly, still considered him very much her son, even though she wasn't the one raising him. And she was constantly in thought over him. Eli raised up Samuel, taught him the ways of God, and it's a good thing because we get a little bit of a history. I've referred to Josephus before. Josephus is a Jewish historian that talks a lot about some of the Jewish history that we don't get in the Bible. And I want to tell you what Josephus has to say about Eli's son. And here is what he says. The occasion was this. Eli the high priest had 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas. These sons Eli were guilty of injustice toward men and impiety towards God, and abstained from no sort of wickedness. Some of their gifts they carried off as belonging to the honorable employment they had. Others they took away by violence. They were also guilty of impurity with women that came to worship at the tabernacle, obliging some to submit to their lust by force, and enticing others by bribes. Nay, the whole course of their lives was no better than tyranny. Their father, therefore, was angry at them for such was their wickedness, and expected that God would suddenly inflict his punishment upon them for what they had done. The multitude took it heinously also. So not only does God recognize these 2 gentlemen are not gentlemen, but so does all of the people around. And as I said, these are the sons of the priest. They are the ones who will take over when Eli dies and he is getting old. Now, what I'm going to tell you is, while Samuel is in the temple being raised by Eli, these 2 gentlemen, and I use that term loosely, continued their debauchery and their terribleness. They literally mocked God. And here is where, when we look at Hannah's surrender, in fact, 1 Samuel 1, 23 through 26, Elkanah said to his wife, "Do what you think is best. Stay home until you have weaned him. Yes, let the Lord complete what he has begun." So she did, and she stayed home and nursed her son, and she weaned him. And she took him to Shiloh, bringing to the makings of a generous offering meal, a prize bowl, flour, and wine. The child was so young to be sent off. At first they butchered the bull and brought the child to Eli, and Hannah said, "Excuse me, sir, would you believe that I am the very woman who was standing before you at this very spot, praying to God? I prayed for this child, and God gave him what I asked for. And now I have dedicated him to God. He's dedicated to God for life." Like I said, it would have taken $1.35 to redeem him and kept him at home. But Hannah said, "No. I dedicated this man, my son, to God, and I desire to keep that." At no point did she ever abandon him. At no point did she ever forget him. Like I said, she continued to bring him clothing and, surround him with prayer. But that was the extent of her training. She sticks to her agreement. And it's a good thing, because what has happened is that the two sons of Eli, being as evil as they are, go out to war with the Philistines. And the Philistines strike down both the boys. And they take and seize the Ark of the Covenant, which is the more sacred items of the Jewish people. And when Eli heard this, he fell over dead, because he was old and very heavy. Samuel was nothing but a young man when he began to lead Israel. And yet, if you read your Old Testament, not only are there two books, 1 and 2 Samuel, dedicated to his story, but you see him all throughout 1 and 2 Kings and 1 and 2 Chronicles. Samuel is one of the key major figures of the Old Testament. He ranks up there with Abraham and Moses. He is one of the greatest leaders. And I would tell you that none of this could have happened had it not been for the love of a mother who said, "I will surrender my child to God." Knowing that what she desired to do in raising her own child far limited God's ability to use Samuel. Samuel was a man who literally transformed Israel. He was a man who held Israel to bay when they strayed. He was a man who called kings like Saul on account when they erred. None of this could have happened had it not been for the love of a mother, Hannah. Now, it seems a little bit on the sad side. A woman who wanted to be a mother so badly. And when God gives her that son, she must surrender him to God. And I think it's important to notice, because Josephus also has some conversation about Hannah. And Josephus responds that she had three daughters and several sons. And I love the fact that Josephus focuses on this, because if you look at any Jewish history, there will always be the number of sons, and he had several daughters. Josephus put 3 daughters before the sons. And I think there is a reason for that Josephus breaks the rules of the Jewish history by recording the number of daughters that Hannah had. Because those women were raised by Hannah, and so were her other sons. And I have zero doubt that those 3 young ladies, following Hannah's example, became wonderful mothers and grandmothers themselves. we see Hannah's desire to be a mother played out. She is what is, I consider, a perfect picture of what a mother should be. She desires to serve God first. She desires for her children to follow God. And even with her own desires conflicting with that of what God wanted, she was willing to submit to God, to surrender Samuel. Had she given the $1.35 to redeem Samuel, not one person would have criticized her. Not one person would have said she was wrong. In fact, most people would have said, I understand completely. But she did not. When she made an oath to God that this child shall be your servant, I shall dedicate his entire life to you. She did what I think every good mother should do, and that is to commit their children to God, to let them see God thoroughly through them and with them. Hannah's sacrifice, if you will, saved Israel. And Samuel led Israel for many, many years. I think on this Mother's Day, as we look at what it is to be a mother, Hannah is a mother that I think deserves to be not only recognized, but admired. She sacrificed her own desires for the good of her people, for the good of her son, and for the good that God would bring through her son. Nothing ever came between her and her desire to serve God. And that, my friends, I think is the epitome of what a good mother would be. To never let anything come between you and God. This Mother's Day, as we celebrate moms and how they have raised us and how they've done what they've done, understand that we are all flawed. We have not all done it perfectly, but that we can all desire to serve God more fully in the roles that we have. We are here to serve God, just as Hannah was. And it is my hope and my desire that you too put God before everything else in this day. Thank you.